The wild times continue in the market, and it's time for an update before we go into the weekend. Tomorrow, one more trading day. It is very, very important in these times that we are on top of our game. And you know that we cover Tesla here a lot, but this video has to focus on the macro situation with Iran and the greater landscape in the market, because this is clearly overriding any kind of movement with Tesla. So we are seeing the AI stocks, NVDA, Tesla, and so on, getting hammered again after Monday's up day that I still can't really explain what happened on Monday. I think there was a lot of fake news, but the market fell for it. It was very predictable. So I positioned myself accordingly, and that paid off a lot. But now we have to look forward into the weekend that is coming, because the situation is tense. So let's go over what I just posted on X. I summarized this pretty, I think, effectively in terms of capturing my thinking and my current strategy, how I go into the next week, because I think it's very decisive right now to look at macro and make sure we are not getting hammered here. So what I did is I summarized my position on what I think. Of course, many other people think the same, but here's my thought. What happens with Iran, the United States, Israel over the weekend when this deadline for negotiation goes away? I, by the way, posted also that I learned the hard way that this is a very tribal discussion. So I'm a little bit naive sometimes, as you guys know. I'm thinking about pioneer lands. I'm not so interested in, desert tribes. And I am focusing on simulating and predicting the future. And normally that's a lot of fun with everyone. But in this case, it's not so much fun, because there's constant fire on my X, or even on my YouTube, with people who are very aggressive for whatever reason. So I always think first, is it my fault? It's clearly their fault, by the way. But is it also my fault? And I decided I need to tone it down and maximize my neutrality. So I'm not going to use taco anymore, for example, even though I never considered that a bad term, by the way. But I am trying to not avoid very hard to be seen as partial in any way on any side. But in return, I expect everyone here to behave. In the comments, most of you just enjoy my take, so don't, please, if there's an outlier who thinks they have to chip in and say I'm stupid, or Israel is stupid, or Israel is great, or US like Trump, whatever, please don't do that. This is not the place to do that. We want to be right about the future. So here are my thoughts, what the situation actually is. Since Monday, I've been preparing for escalation. Okay, the way I see it is what Trump says, this negotiation that is going on, is clearly not really a negotiation. It is clear for me between the lines that Iran is not partaking in that negotiation, which is a weird thing. So I think it's a pretense to some extent, and therefore I think it will fail. And I think Trump already knows that it's going to fail. And no one even expects it to not fail. Therefore, we have to prepare for escalation. We see we see a lot of troop movements on the United States side into the region. And that means probably boots on the ground over the weekend. So what's very interesting is all of us tend to be in some form of bubble. So I'm trying to, once I understand my own bias or my own conviction that there will be boots on the ground, that this will also be not a good idea, I'm trying to listen to the other side. There are not too many people who actually believe there won't be boots on the ground, but there is one fraction that thinks this is an incredibly bad idea, and another faction that thinks it's a good idea. And I'm very interested in the crowd that thinks it's a good idea, because I want to hear the arguments and understand how likely it is that Trump also thinks that, because Trump and the team have to make this decision. And when I read X, the MAGA accounts, but also watch Fox, I can see that there is a thinking, or definitely there is a case to be made that this is a good idea, which is very important for us to understand, that there can be a case to be made it's a good idea. Otherwise, there can't be action. So in my assessment, this is going to happen. I think there is only a 25% chance or less that we see some form of peace over the weekend, and there's a 75% or more of escalation, including the attempt to take this Kark island with Marines. Now, We might get a little delayed even if there is a failure in achieving, a peace agreement. Maybe they need to get ready for another 48 hours or something after Friday's close. And so maybe the action doesn't happen over the weekend, but is being prepared for Monday. No matter what, that doesn't matter too much. The question is, will it happen or not by next week? I think 75% chance of escalation, 25% chance of, magical turnaround. So in my assessment, I did a little Excel exercise. The market has still not priced in a long-term conflict. The market has not priced in a long-term conflict. Let me explain what I mean. When you look at the NASDAQ and you see where the NASDAQ is actually going, year to date, for example, the NASDAQ is only down 6.68%, roughly 7%. Okay, this is where Iran really heated up from the very beginning. I do think if we have a real conflict here, a real long-lasting war with boots on the ground, escalation, Kark Island with real risks that then Marines get killed and then the US has to escalate, the whole shebang. Then, the United States has to start invading Iran. All of that becomes massively more likely, even if you personally think it's not going to happen, but it just probabilistically becomes much more likely once you have the boots on the ground on Kark Island or wherever. So the market has to price it in. And that would shift that rationale dramatically. I think the appropriate market reaction to that, the expected market reaction is 10 to 20% drop for the market. And don't forget, when it comes to individual stocks, including Tesla, they don't play a big role here. They will follow the beta and they will follow the market in a crisis situation short term. You can talk about Optimus and Robotaxi all day long. This will not have any impact. Tesla will move with the market in situations like that in the short term. So my expectation is that once it becomes clear to everyone, and as I said, it's not a guarantee, I just think it's very likely, that we have a long-term conflict with real boots on the ground, with real dead American soldiers and a lot of dead Iranian soldiers, with the Strait of Hormuz being blocked for a long period of time, being a war zone, the market will drop 10 to 20% in my opinion. Not more, maybe long-term more, but not more. That's just my estimate based on historic behavior. We have dropped 7% so far. So to make it a round number, I think we will drop another 7 to 8% in the middle, like 15% down once that happens. And I also think once we see that, that scenario becoming real, which could happen over the weekend, I think it will happen over the weekend. There's a high chance. I think the market will then pull forward the entire risk. Markets do not want to stand on the sidelines and watch. They will realize, okay, now we have to reprice and it will be a major drop. If that happens, that would be my best guess, okay? It's not going to be, we drop 3%, we drop another 3%, we drop another 3%. It's going to be rapid because we want to reprice quickly. So that means another 7-8% down from here in this case. That means Tesla, if it follows its own beta, 16% down. Let's look at Tesla, what that would mean. It's not positive. Oh, it's because it's 5 days. So Tesla's 380. If you go 20% down, that's 320. So let's say 330. I think that's the natural reaction if the market would drop like that. Tesla has to drop like that. As I said, independent of anything you think happens in April with Cybercap, with scaling, with AGI, it doesn't matter. In case we have that scenario, I think then, and as I said, this is the scenario that we have an escalation, that the war escalates and therefore cements itself long-term for the next months. Then from there, I think we will not see a continued deterioration of the market because that's not what we see historically with these wars. When a war happens, you see a massive rapid drop and then you see the market going up slowly, grinding higher. There's this trumpets versus cannons, right? When you hear trumpets, you crash. The war trumpets when the war starts. And when you hear cannons, the stocks go up. Because the market's always forward-looking. When you hear cannons, everything's already priced in. And then people see, when you hear cannons and fighting, what comes next? End of war. When you hear trumpets, what comes next? War. So rapid repricing, in my opinion, rapid drop in this case. And then we grind higher for a long time. Unless some bad future escalation happens, which I don't think is very likely. In terms of not anticipated escalation. So if it's just escalating in the sense, more and more soldiers, more and more death and destruction, that is priced in at that point. and the stocks will grind higher. And then we can refocus again on the individual stocks and what they're doing, especially Tesla. And you can imagine we shouldn't get carried away with our dream scenarios and dreaming about things. But if this is the scenario and next week we see a massive drop, well, not massive, but what I just explained, it could be the perfect setup for Tesla, because I remain bullish on Cybercap. Let's say for Q2, I'm chickening out a little bit on April, but not really. I think Cybercap scaling in April is absolutely in the cards. But I do think we should expect some delay into May, and we can then anticipate maybe even more delay into June. But I do think probably peak probability is end of April to mid of May, when we see suddenly real movement, right? When people realize FSD works. And then we see a major rally in the stock, in my opinion. So if Tesla drops, if the NASDAQ drops because of escalation next week and it drops 8% and Tesla drops 16% and hits like 330, 340, it could be a really, really good opportunity. Of course, if we have robotaxi delays, then we are talking about Tesla crashing. That's a different story. We have to assess that risk very separately. So this is how I see the situation. We can also look into crude oil, for example, into the futures. What happened today? You see they're creeping higher. So in case you don't know what that is here, this is crude oil futures. And it's a super interesting thing. Here you see the price per barrel. And how these futures work is they're priced for certain, times. It's very cool. That's why they're called futures. And so you can basically see what the market is betting on. The market is betting on 93 per barrel in May, and 90 in June, and 87 in July. So you see how the price then goes down, right? Because the market is saying, well, in 1 year it's down. So the market is pricing in de-escalation of the war, de-escalation of the Strait of Hormuz, and de-escalation of oil supply. So the futures are peaking here. I think this entire picture will, of course, change with an escalation, right? You will see that price going up, and then you will see this shock wave into the future where you see a peak at some point. So this can reverse. It could go, this goes to 100, this goes to 110, this goes to 120, this goes to 110, this goes to 100, this goes to 90, for example. That's the shock wave. And the shock wave means the oil market has to then anticipate, well, where do we see the biggest supply crunch coming, which is a function of war activity and the ability of the United States to control the Strait of Hormuz, or Iran with the ability to threaten the Strait of Hormuz. And that will be reflected in these price assumptions of the oil market, which is very interesting, by the way. So right now we have a de-escalatory futures curve where they see the biggest escalations currently, right? You see the current price is 94, so in May it's lower, which means from here it's a de-escalatory path, which of course I would say is unlikely actually. So this is mispriced. And of course oil is the lifeblood of the global economy. If that happens and there's a shock wave, it hits all economies. There are certain producers like Russia and the United States that benefit on a vertical and industry level. But the economies, you guys know how it is. You have to fill up your cars and all the inputs and helium and the whole shebang. All these derivative or connected commodities are being hit here. So that is kind of the situation. What do? Well, I am as short-term bearish as I have ever been in the last 24 months. And I have basically de-risked my portfolio very dramatically since Monday and Tuesday. And so far that has worked very well, of course. I am de-risked. I have absolutely minimized my core positions. I have put on a bunch of short calls on Tesla, mostly 385 to 390 and 392 yesterday. And on, what is it today, Thursday? On Tuesday and Wednesday. And that has worked very well. That has made me outperform today very clearly. I think my portfolio is down something like 0.2 or something today. Yesterday I was up much more than Tesla, so everything works well right now. My main risk with that setup is if we see a rally over 390 by tomorrow, I'm starting to lose alpha. I will underperform Tesla. And over the weekend, I will further de-risk. I will also not put on a big short position or anything like that, because I think there's still a tail risk as something weird happens and the market rally again on Monday. So I want to absolutely reduce exposure with a clear bias towards market dropping a lot. That is how I see things. How do I mitigate my risk? My risk is that I am wrong, of course. There's 25% chance that we actually see a reversal and suddenly peace breaks out. In that case, I will need to miss out on some upside. If Tesla goes up 5% and I only have, let's say, 50% of the portfolio in Tesla, then I will lose out on 2.5% alpha. It's that simple. Or not even alpha, I will have negative alpha. But given the situation and given my level of confidence that we will have a problem here, a major problem, over the weekend into next week, it's vastly more likely, in my opinion, that we have a giant problem. From a market perspective, maybe you're a big revenge fan of United States versus Iran and you think this is all great. That's not what I'm judging here. I'm just judging the market. If that happens, I don't want to be caught flat-footed with full exposure because it seems too predictable to me. There you have the situation. We will see next week. Should I be right? This will add tremendous alpha to us. We will lose money. If the market crashes, I will lose money, but I will lose much less than the market and much, much less than Tesla. And if that happens, I will have very significant dry powder to then absolutely double down into Tesla, which I don't do right now. I'm taking chips off the table. Last word before we close. If you are a long-term Tesla shareholder, if you are buy and hold, I don't think you have anything to worry here. I don't think you should worry at all if this drops to 320, 330. Not permanent. This is a market reaction. Has nothing to do with Tesla. If you're in NVDA, same thing. And NVDA dropped less, of course. If you're in Robinhood, got absolutely hammered. I would not worry about this. I think this is over soon. Before that, we might get some real pain. And from there, it's going to be very bullish. That is what I think. We will cover this more macro, of course. If it happens, we have to talk about oil prices, recession, and all kinds of things. But for now, that's it from me. Thanks for tuning in and come back tomorrow. We will have some very exciting news on Pioneer Alpha. By the way, go to pioneeralpha.org. That's my last message for you today. We have some beautiful things going on here. If you go to Pioneer Alpha, we have very cool things going on where you can actually learn about the latest improvement in the investment mechanics here in the Pioneer Alpha LLC for US investors, where we capture my portfolio. I will be probably one of the largest investors here in the underlying Pioneer bond. But it's good to learn about what we are doing here and how we generate continuous returns under certain circumstances in this new channel. It's very cool. Just take a look and you will see. So I hope that was interesting and see you tomorrow.